Hi guys, welcome. Today I'm going to do a brief overview about the planets and just talk a little bit about how they fit into a cosmological scheme that was outlined in the ancient world. What we're looking at right now is called the Ptolemaic model of the cosmos, basically. I don't think it was invented by Ptolemy, who was an astrologer and astronomer in the ancient world from Alexandria, Egypt, but we call it that for whatever reason. That tends to happen with history and whatnot. We designate something as something as some name because it was based on our understanding of it at the time, and it sort of just sticks. So, as astrologers, we all know what this is talking about pretty much if we're familiar with the ancient systems of astrology, and so we all kind of just call it the Ptolemaic model of consciousness, or Ptolemaic model uh, of the cosmos or something like that, the Ptolemaic model of things, whatever. And it's, it, I don't know that it was ever meant to be literal. There's kind of this myth that, people used to think the earth was flat and that people thought that the earth was at the center of things. And there's evidence to show that this wasn't the case, that, the, you know, that Pythagoras taught a heliocentric and spherical model of the cosmos and the planets and the solar system and whatnot, that you find it in the Vedas as well, pretty indisputably, that a heliocentric system is outlined in the Vedas and whatnot. So, it's kind of a myth that everyone sort of believed these things, as I understand it. And, I'm still convinced that this model, it still has relevance today because it is more about consciousness than it is about anything literal. And so you have the Earth at the center here, and then you have 7 rings or spheres, which are each ruled by one of the 7 classical planets of astrology, with the sun and moon, of course, being the lights, but they're included here as well. And this is really interesting because it's a much different order than we get for the planetary day sequence, which begins with the sun and moon. And the sun and moon here, it kind of screws up the natural order of things because obviously the sun is not literally at the center of things, right? The sun would be, if we forget about the Earth, the sun would be here under Mercury because we get sun, Mercury, Venus, Earth, and then, slash moon, and then Mars, Jupiter, Saturn. But what's fascinating here is that nonetheless, right, we have Saturn, the slowest and furthest planet out from the sun, as the furthest sphere from the Earth. So this is primarily based on planetary speed and a little bit on distance, right? Again, the sun and the moon kind of screw up the distance factor, but speed-wise it makes sense because Saturn's slowest, then Jupiter, then Mars, then Sun, indeed, then Venus, Mercury, and then Moon. Moon is the fastest of those 7 bodies moving, through a sign in roughly 3 days' time, whereas everything else takes quite a bit longer compared to the moon. And so it's really it's fascinating that they ordered it like this, of course, because it has an astronomical reality to it. And in occult doctrine, and this includes ancient mythological and esoteric texts and stuff, we find this scheme of 7 that basically reality as we understand it is divided into 7 spheres for whatever reason. 7 is it's a very mystical number. Out of the key numbers, right? Numbers 1 through 9, because once you get to 10, you're just repeating numbers. 1 through 9. 7 is the only number that you cannot evenly divide the circle by. When you divide the circle 360 degrees by 7, you get a really strange number that's like 51.525, and it just it's like a decimal that just appears to go on forever. And it may in fact go on forever. It's basically an irrational number. So in Genesis, when it talks about the 7 days of creation, and on the 7th day it says God rested, a better translation from an edition of the Tanakh I have says God ceased. And I think that that's a much better translation because the 7th day, the Sabbath, which corresponds to Saturday, not Sunday, as the Christians changed it to that. mostly because of anti-Semitism. Anyway, the Sabbath is about absorption. You know, it's like a it's sort of like a it's sort of like an in-breath after this out-breath. You know, there's like this out-breath that creates, God's creating day by day or whatever, these six planes, and then this sort of seventh is kind of the out-breath. And I know that the Saturn sphere, the seventh sphere as we call it, it's you know, it's the first one of these seven, right? Because this is the last one, the Earth. And I'll talk about that in a moment. And I'm aware of that. And it's funny because, you know, we want to think about things so linearly. That's how our mind works. It's how our lunar Mercury consciousness works. We want to think linearly. We want things to be, especially in this day and age, and it drives me nuts. We want things to be super measurable. You know, we want astrology, a lot of us want astrology to be statistical and scientifically verifiable according to today's standards of science, which are completely different standards for science than the ancients had, where science was not separate from philosophy and religion and myth and occultism and stuff. They were all one thing. And that's why all these ancient astrologers and astronomers did both and more. You know, we have all these polymaths. Good examples are people like Kepler and Isaac Newton and whatnot. You know, they studied many different disciplines, and and one of those disciplines was astrology. And in fact, astronomer and astrologer, there weren't two separate words. If you were an astronomer, you were also an astrologer. And Ptolemy somewhere calls astrology the soul of astronomy. So there was maybe a differentiation on some level, but it wasn't what we think of it as today as astrology and astronomy. They were one, and they were one thing. You had to practice both. And there was no issue with this. It wasn't like a strange thing to people. It was just like, oh no, you just practice both. That's just how it is. That's how it makes sense. So astrology gives meaning to the facts, quote unquote, of what we call astronomy today. And that's very, very important, because something is only really as useful as it is meaningful. And by meaningful, I just mean something is only, basically, you can have the raw facts, right? Like we associate with this with the third house in astrology. But if they don't enrich your life and make it meaningful and make it beautiful, which would be the ninth house, right? Opposite the third, then what good are these facts, you know? Yeah, I was just recently watching a video, and it was with my friend Fernando, and he was interviewing astrologer Ryan Kurtzak, and Ryan was saying how growing up he had this friend who was like really intelligent and stuff, but the guy was always pushing this, the Earth is 6,000 years old on him kind of thing, until finally Ryan was saying, okay, it doesn't really matter. I don't know. I don't think it's 6,000 years old. But I don't know. And it doesn't actually, that doesn't have any effect on our everyday lives. It doesn't mean anything for our, you know, happiness and fulfillment. So that's really how we have to be looking at things, I think, if we want to live a more fulfilled existence, you know, not getting stuck on stupid. What is the meaning of something? So, sorry, returning from that little tangent, my point here is that this diagram is represented linearly. You know, we have these stages of these illustrated as these seven planes, one of each planet, but it's not linear, right? Obviously, as we're going to learn in the subsequent videos in this series, like the sun being representative of the cosmic intellect and the soul doesn't really fit here in a linear manner. You know, it doesn't really come after Saturn, so to speak. And same with the moon and whatnot. You know, the sun and moon are the primal duality, the cosmic day and night, or yang and yin. So you have to keep that in mind when you're studying this stuff. It's not linear, even though it's represented linear. And so anyway, back to Saturn and the Sabbath and the seven, right? So seven is this absorption. It's this completion of things. It is like, it's representative of the fact that the parts don't add up to make the whole, right? If reality is holistic, then the sum of the individual parts do not equal the whole. There's something more. There's this plus factor that is sort of mysterious and mystical. And that's one of the things the number 7 represents, because if you take a circle and then you fit you can fit 6 smaller circles within that circle based on a certain mathematical ratio. And I forget exactly what that is, but you're basically dividing the circle by 6, and so you're able to fit mathematically 6 equal sized circles within a bigger circle. Well, you can't fit a 7th in there, right? So again, the 7th is sort of the space. If you look at a diagram like that, it's the space that's filling in the void created by the fact that you can't fill up the whole circle with 7 small equal circles. You can only do 6. Excuse me. So 7 is a very important number for many, many reasons. And I definitely encourage you to explore it more mathematically. But the universe and consciousness as we understand it, the manifest world, is divided into 7 planes. And this is the 7 days of creation. It's the 7 rays of Surya and occult philosophy in general. It's the, there's just so many. There's so many 7 things in myths and in esoteric teaching. I'm forgetting most of them, but you can always look into it. The Earth is considered to be basically a real illusion and a reflection of everything else, which is also the name of a great Steve Vai album, Real Illusions, Reflections, which I recommend checking out. But the point is that the Earth, right, it's the stage upon which everything else is unfolding. It's just a play of light and shadow, a dance, if you will. And if you think about a stage in theater, right, all that a stage is it's just the ground that the actors are performing a play on, right? If the actors are the planets and, the props and things are like the signs of the zodiac that the planets are, interacting with or whatever, maybe the costumes too, then, the ground is, maybe the astrological houses, but I wouldn't even take it that far. The ground is just, it's arbitrary. It's just like, this is where we happen to be performing a play. And so therefore this is a stage, not a theater, but a stage, right? So the stage doesn't really exist. It's just the natural result of the fact that people are performing a play. So I think that's very important. And typically, this schema is 9 spheres, okay? The 8th sphere being the sphere of the fixed stars, and the 9th sphere being the Empyrean, which is like the throne or realm of God, and sometimes it's likened to like a divine fire. And Empyrean is a Latin word, probably has Greek origins, and it's kind of like having to do with the heavens or something like this. So again, normally this, a lot of times this isn't 3 spheres, it's just 1 together. And it's just called the sphere of the fixed stars. So this is really cool because this is the 8th sphere, the sphere of the stars, and it's sort of like the realm of souls. And you have this soul symbolism because you have all these little suns, communing with one another, making up these constellations that we see here on Earth. And so it's like a conglomeration of suns, souls, stars, so on. And the sun, of course, is our soul. And especially when we look at an individual chart, it gives insight into the connection with the soul and truth and things like that. So the sphere of the fixed stars, then, which you can see during the night, right? It rises east to west because the Earth is rotating west to east. So it appears like it's rising above the Earth if the Earth were stationary, east to west. But the planets move through the zodiac, even though they rise, right, with that sphere, and this is called primary motion, okay? This is east to west primary motion. Even though they are rising like that too, they are moving against it, the other way, west to east, through the zodiacal signs, through the ecliptic, which is the Earth's path around the sun. And that's what the zodiac is, the ecliptic, basically. So they're moving this way while the stars are rising this way. And of course, they're also like rising that way. So they're kind of doing this. So it's almost like there's like a tension, they're like resisting the natural flow of time, the primum mobile flow of time, or the primary motion. They are called, so their movement is called secondary motion. And you have the astrological techniques of primary directions based on the eighth sphere, and the secondary motion or secondary progressions based on the planetary transits through the zodiac. So there's this tension that gets created, and it's kind of like a dysfunctional clock in a sense, because time and space as we understand them aren't, again, they're not linear. They're not real as we think they are. So in the eighth sphere, it's a realm that is said to transcend time and space, and it's the realm of the soul. Whereas the seven spheres below it are still involved in like sort of a more linear cyclical flow of time. But the eighth sphere is like, verging on the cosmic intellect, so to speak, as it's sometimes called, or the nous in Greek. And that is a sphere where everything is comprehended simultaneously. Everything is existing in sort of an infinite duration. And Catholic baptistries are traditionally eight-sided because they are associated, the eight sides are associated with the Christ consciousness transcending the 7 days of creation, sort of the 7 boundaries or 7 chains that bind us to the realm of matter, which is primarily governed by the moon, which is the body closest to the earth. And the earth is called the sublunar sphere as well, or the realm of generation and corruption, where things are growing, reaching their apex and then decaying in an infinite cycle, or seemingly infinite cycle. So that's what this sphere is. And the Gnostics also considered the eighth sphere to be like this. They called it the Ogdoad. So you may want to look some of that stuff up. It's fascinating. This diagram is found in Manly Palmer Hall's book, Secret Teachings of All Ages. And it's not from there. I don't know exactly where it comes from originally. I think it's probably a very old depiction of this Ptolemaic model. But in that book, Manly Hall, he gives just a nice short description of it. And he says that this is divided into 3 instead of just being one, as representing sort of the threefold nature of deity. God as the 1 in 3 or 3 in 1, that is sort of the foundation of the manifested existence. So God as the 3 in 1 is sort of like the hidden, the archetype that's behind everything. And then God with 4 aspects or 4 faces, like Lord Brahma, for example, having 4 faces, or the Tetragrammaton in Genesis being these 4 Hebrew letters, the 4 faces of deity, is God manifested, so to speak. And so when you add 3 and 4 together, you get 7. So hence you have these 7 planes. When you have 12, like the 12 signs of the zodiac, what you're seeing is basically, you're seeing 3 and 4 again, but you're seeing 4 unfolded as 3, or 3 unfolded as 4. It gets a little tricky to think about like this, but basically what you're seeing is manifested existence being 4 in perfection, each 4 being 3, each spoke of a wheel, being 3, which makes perfect harmony, and so on. So you have the spiritual 3 in the material 4. And matter and spirit are really just 2 ends of the same axis. They're one and the same. They're not really separate. It's sort of just like a spectrum of light. One end of that spectrum is darker and one end is lighter, but it's really just, they're the same thing. Just like, it's the sun appears to disappear during the night, but in reality, it's always there, astronomically speaking. So you can think of it like that. So I really like that he said this, because it made this diagram make more sense to me. I'm used to thinking of it as the 9 spheres, and this 8th sphere is now divided by 3, so we get 10, and we get an 11th, and arguably a 12th if you want to include the Earth. And that kind of corresponds astrologically to Pisces, where Pisces is sort of this ocean that the streams of the 11 preceding signs all flow into, which is why Pisces is the most diffuse and illusory of the signs, and why it seems to sort of hold all the other signs within itself in a way. Like the typical Pisces type can kind of adapt to any and all situations very easily, oftentimes unconsciously, and even get lost in them. So that's kind of fun to note. 11 is also a powerful number if we exclude the Earth, but yeah, you can go on forever with the numerology stuff. So I will leave that alone for now. But we have the stars, which are clearly the constellational zodiac, which is not even, meaning that some constellations are larger than others while some are smaller. That's not the zodiac as we know it. The zodiac as we know it is an equal division of the circle by 12. So each sign is 30 degrees. So we actually have three zodiacs, which corresponds to reality. Because we have the constellational zodiac, which is uneven. We have the sidereal zodiac, which changes and moves relative to the Earth and is somewhat even, somewhat lined up with the constellations, but by no means is it the same thing, and by no means does it fit perfectly at all because of what I just explained. So the sidereal zodiac is changeable. It changes relative to our perspective here on Earth, and that's what's important. And then the tropical zodiac, which is unchanging. It is always the same every year. The signs are always associated with the seasons. And so basically, we're having the primum mobile, what's being called the primum mobile, which is typically the eighth sphere kind of area, or the ninth sphere. Sometimes it's the ninth sphere. I don't know. Anyway, these spheres they're not set in stone, as we'll see in a moment. But yeah, we have these three different zodiacs, which are the threefold aspect of deity. And if you read about the Trimurti in Indian lore, or you read about the Trinity in Christianity and so on, and in many other places too, it exists. Even in like the Nordic pantheon, you have three aspects of Odin esoterically. You'll understand this better, and it just makes perfect sense. Tropical, sidereal, and constellational. So three different zodiacs. Very cool stuff. And then, yeah, the Empyrean, the realm of the divine or the cosmic fire or something like that. Cool. So this is typically how it's presented. We're going to jump real quick to another presentation of it by Ibn Arabi, who is a Sufi mystic who did a ton of stuff with astrology. He divides the cosmos into 15 spheres if we include the Earth, 14 without it, which is 7 doubled, which is significant as well. Okay, so he's got, this sphere of the, it's easier to see it on this one. This one's more beautiful, the one with the Arabic and stuff, but we can see it easier here because that's kind of blurry. So he added some of the elements. I don't know why he excluded fire from this, but he did. It's possible that he was associating ether and fire as sort of one thing, which is sometimes done. Sometimes in some systems, fire comes before air, and you'll find that in the Buddy calendar used by the Baha'i Faith, for example, which was created by the Exalted Bab. Perhaps another video for another time. So it's possible that by ether, he includes fire. I don't know. I'm not an expert on his division, but I just wanted to show that there were other ways of dividing the heavens, and that this is a 14, 15-fold division. It has the same 7-fold nature of the planets. Then it has the heaven of the fixed stars, and then it has the starless heaven, which is the archetypal realm where we get the 12 signs of the zodiac, and we get the 28 Arabic letters, which become the foundation for the 28 lunar mansions, according to Ibn Arabi. But in the heaven of the fixed stars, we get that stuff more materially. We get these physical constellations. We get these lunar constellations based on where the moon is in the sky and so on. But the idea was the starless heaven is where the archetype, the number, precedes sort of the reality of that. Similar to what I was talking about with the Ptolemaic model I just showed. But Ibn Arabi really took it a step further and really said, yeah, this is how it is. And he used the tropical zodiac, and he also used tropical lunar mansions. Again, for the reasons that he associated the lunar mansions as coming from the Arabic letters, which precede the actual 28-fold star cluster division of the sky. And so I think it's a both and. I think that's what's so cool about this, is a both and. It's not one or the other. And each one will give you a slightly different perspective, but should still give you the same fundamental information, because there's no one-to-one relationship between astrology and the facts of life. It just doesn't exist as much as some people would like it to. Then he divided the top by, it's like two. It's like the Empyrean divided by two. And I do wonder if this sphere of the divine throne is sort of also including the space around here, even though it's slightly different in this one here. I'm not sure, but nonetheless, we kind of have like the divine pedestal is perhaps the very first flutter of deity out of complete and utter beingness. And whereas the divine throne is sort of the vast cosmic uncognizable realm. But perhaps the pedestal is sort of what we can approach. It's kind of like the realm of the logos, to use a Greek term, the point within the circle. Not totally sure about that, but it would make sense. What's fascinating about this is if we divide it, if we do 15 and include the Earth, the sun stands exactly at the middle. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, right? Then sun, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So again, it's a powerful metaphor for the sun being the center of our cosmos, the solar system, right? But that's our cosmos metaphorically. And the sun is the soul, the sun is the heart as well in astrological symbolism. So it's the heart of things. In this in the Ptolemaic system, the basic Ptolemaic system, the sun is really only the heart of the seven planes, but it's still a heart, So we're going to be expanding and extrapolating upon all of this in the videos that follow, where I'll talk about each planet separately and do my best to just get to the essence of each of those planets. So thank you so much for tuning in. Please hit like and subscribe to see more. Visit my website, visit my Facebook, and check me out on Instagram. Okay, guys, have a great day.